Okay, so this series of videos is going to be looking at networking, and we're going to start by looking at what networks are and the advantages and disadvantages of them. So this little video is going to cover standalone networks versus connected networks, wired versus wireless. We won't go into too much detail regarding that. When we start to look at the different types of media, we'll focus on specifically on wired and wireless. This will be more like the advantages and disadvantages. And finally we'll cover with the advantages and disadvantages of a network. So, where did it all begin? Networks really started millions of years ago. And when man first harnessed fire, they started to use it to communicate. And as you see by the picture on the right, you know, they set up sort of like observation posts. And this was really the start of the first telegraph network. And you've also got smoke signals as well that indigenous peoples have used for many years. This developed into the telegraph network and eventually into the telephone network, as we see in the bottom right picture. And from that point, really, the rest was history, as it were. The networks, as soon as the technology developed, the networks flourished and grew. Initially through the original telegraph network, because the telegraph network developed into the telephone network, and the telephone network is now still in existence, but we've also got data travelling down those same lines, and we've got many more lines than we did have back in the sort of late 1800s, early turn of the century. So when we're looking at networks, we've got standalone devices and we've got network devices. And a standalone device is basically any device that does not share a network connection with another device. So that could be a computer, mobile phone, printer, server, or any other sort of piece of network hardware, such as routers, hubs, switches. You've got tablets, you've got fridges, cookers, freezers, kettles, microwaves, all sorts of different household appliances are now becoming network devices, and they're all being shared on our home networks. As soon as a connection is established between two devices, they are networked. If they are communicating, if they can send data to each other, they are networked, and that is pretty much the definition of a network, of a networked device. Wired connections is a physical link between two devices. Now you'll know, or you may have heard of an Ethernet cable. Technically speaking, it's not an Ethernet cable. Ethernet is the protocol used to physically connect devices and transfer data between two physically connected devices down a copper medium. But physically connected or wired connections typically allow a higher data transfer rate. Now, I said typically. Modern wireless networks are actually starting to catch up to that, and you've got a copper cable can transfer speeds. We'll look at this in greater detail when we look at the media the media slide. But a copper cable can transfer at about 100 megabits per second over Ethernet. You've got or a gigabit over Ethernet, as it is now, and you've got a comparable data transfer rate with AC, so 802.11ac wireless, which is another wireless protocol, which basically means that it can transfer data at a high rate. So wireless is catching up in terms of data transfer rates. However, AC is not widely established. N is the most common, which is about 56 megabits per second. A wired connection is generally speaking more reliable because you have a physical connection between the two. There is a connection you can see. There is nothing that's stopping it, and also that connection is less susceptible to degradation and interference. Networks were typically limited to about 100 meters, so you wouldn't get degradation across the wire. A wireless connection is a non-physical link, so this can be something such as Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. There's something called WiMAX as well, which is basically any non-physical link between two devices. yeah, NFC is another one as well. It's increasingly more common. We're seeing these used to connect not just devices on a small area, but on a sort of increasingly larger scale. We're getting to see wireless connectivity. You get greater portability with it, so you've got things like mobile devices, and it allows you to roam and it allows you to move around, whereas as a wired connection, as a physical connection, won't allow you to do that. You're limited to wherever the cable will allow you to reach. Also, wireless devices are a lot less secure. The wired connection, there's a plastic sheathing around the wire, which somebody has to physically get into that wire to tap that wire to actually get the data from it. Whereas a wireless connection, you can literally just sit there and use something like Wireshark to sniff the traffic that's passing through the airwaves, and you can snoop and listen to anybody's sort of network conversation. The advantages and disadvantages of networks. Advantages: you can share resources such as printers. You can also share files. Backups are more secure because you can take them away from the device. If your device breaks, you can back up somewhere else to a network, and you can use RAID configurations on file servers, which mean that there's a bit more redundancy, better redundancy than your home PC. It also allows better communication for things like email and internet as well. Disadvantages is if the central server goes down, so this can be a file server or a web server, then access to that content is removed. So in other words, if your web server goes down, people can't see your website. They can't access whatever content's on there. If a school network goes down, then your school files aren't available. That type of thing. Malware can propagate more readily, so it can spread a lot faster. If you've got a standalone device that's not networked, that is the only device which it's going to be affected. Whereas if you've got a worm in a network, the idea of a worm is to sort of replicate itself and spread. Networks are more expensive to set up because you've got more equipment, more cabling, and depending on the size of the network, it can really become expensive. You're talking like tens of thousands of pounds for switches and routers. It can get quite expensive. And also, when you start getting more expensive kit, you need somebody to manage it, so you're going to need to employ somebody. Also, in terms of skill level, it requires somebody that's a little bit more skilled, that's a little bit experienced in managing networks, to sit there and actually do that job. That kind of covers the advantages and disadvantages of networks.